20 armed men were in that room, and not one of them was looking at the most dangerous person in it. Zuri Hargrove was pushing a mop cart. She had already counted the men, positioned with the kind of spacing that does not happen accidentally. She had already clocked the exits, one elevator, 2 stairwells, both locked from outside. She had already identified the kill method, the timeline, and the one person in that room whose shoes did not match his uniform. She knew exactly how bad this was, and she still picked up her mop. That is the first thing worth understanding. Why would a janitor, a woman paid $11 an hour to make rich people's messes disappear, walk toward a poisoning instead of away from it? The second thing is what she knew that nobody else in that room had figured out yet. The third thing, the one that kept her hands steady when every instinct she had was screaming at her to leave, is what she stood to lose if she was wrong. Choi Min-hoon sat at the head of the table like a man who had never once in his life needed to raise his voice to be obeyed. His enemies had planned this with surgical precision, 2 separate attack teams, one kill method already in motion, a signal jammer cutting every phone in the building. You do not build a trap that elaborate for an ordinary man. The sophistication of the threat told Zuri exactly who he was before she ever learned his name. That is when the first thing she had not planned for walked through the service door, a second guard, unscheduled, taking a position directly between her and the table. Her window shrank from 4 minutes to 90 seconds. She kept moving, slower, recalculating. Then the man she had been watching near the bar shifted position, and she understood something that turned her stomach cold. The person standing closest to Choi Min-hoon, the one he leaned toward once to say something quiet, the one his eyes found automatically when he scanned the room, that person had not moved away from the glass. He had moved toward it. The trap was not built by an enemy from outside. It was built by someone Choi Min-hoon ate dinner with. Someone he trusted with the specific knowledge that tonight he would be here, in this room, alone enough to die. The attacker's motive was not business. It was personal, and Zuri was the only one who could see it. If she intervened and failed, no one in that room would believe she was trying to help. She would look exactly like what they would want her to look like, a plant, a conspirator, a woman who knew too much. And that is when she realized the most dangerous part was not stopping them. It was making sure he never found out it was her. She looked at the glass. She looked at her cart. She made the calculation that would follow her every night after this. She moved. She just walked toward a poisoning with a mop and $11 an hour worth of reasons to stay invisible. If your heart is already moving faster than it should, you're exactly where this story needs you. Like this video right now, because what she does in the next 60 seconds is either the bravest thing you've ever seen or the last mistake she ever makes. And you already know you have to find out which one. She had 1 second to look innocent, and she used every single piece of it. The glass was already on the floor, the poison already spreading into the tablecloth, and the room had not yet decided what Zuri Hargrove was. For exactly 2 seconds, nobody moved. The amber stain spread across the white tablecloth in slow, deliberate drops, and Zuri stood there with her cart slightly angled, her apology already forming in broken Korean before anyone had turned to look at her. Then everything moved at once. A hand found her arm, iron grip, no hesitation, and the guard who had been standing 3 feet away was already pulling her backward before Choi Min-hoon had fully processed what happened. She let herself stumble. She made herself small. She gave them the reaction they expected from a frightened woman who had just made a humiliating mistake, because the moment she gave them anything else, she was finished. Choi Min-hoon stood. Not in panic, not in anger. He rose from that chair with the controlled precision of a man running rapid internal calculations, and his eyes did not go to the ruined tablecloth. They came directly to Zuri. Her calm cracked, just slightly, just enough that it showed in the stillness of her hands, too still, too deliberate, the stillness of someone actively suppressing something rather than feeling nothing. He had seen her eyes move to the glass before she knocked it over. Half a second. A flicker. But a man who had survived long enough to sit at the head of that table had built his life on reading exactly that kind of flicker, and Zuri watched the recognition move across his face like a door closing quietly. He did not look like a man who had just been saved. He looked like a man deciding whether she was a threat. The guard tightened his grip, and Zuri ran her original plan through her head in the 2 seconds she had left before the back corridor swallowed her. It was useless. Every part of it assumed she would remain invisible after the spill. Every part of it assumed he would not look at her the way he was looking at her right now, like a variable he had not accounted for and could not afford to leave unresolved. The service door swung shut behind her. Then from the other side of it came a woman's voice, young, frightened, saying a name that stopped every thought Zuri had. It was his sister's voice. She was already inside. She heard the sister's voice and made the worst decision of her life in under 3 seconds. Going back into that room was not bravery. It was the inability to walk away from something she had already started, and Zuri Hargrove knew the difference. The guard was still outside the storage room door. She could hear his weight shifting on the marble, slow, bored, certain she was contained. That certainty was the only asset she had left. A man who is sure of something stops watching it closely. She pressed her back against the door and measured the gap between his footsteps, counting the rhythm, finding the pattern, because everything that happened next depended on timing she could not afford to get wrong. Her multi-tool was already open in her left hand. The door mechanism was simple, a standard lever latch with no deadbolt, which meant the guard outside was the lock, not the hardware. She worked the frame edge slowly, feeling for the point where pressure would release without sound, and told herself the shaking in her fingers was cold air from the ventilation above her, and not fear working its way out of her body against her will. It was fear. She knew it was fear. The latch released. She gave herself one breath. What stopped her was not the guard. It was the voice again, Seo-yeon, closer now, no longer frightened in the way of someone who walked into something unexpected. Frightened in the way of someone being moved against their will, directed, repositioned. Someone in that room had already identified her as leverage. That meant the timeline Zuri had been calculating, the one that gave Choi Min-hoon 20 minutes before the poison reached his bloodstream, was no longer the only clock running. There was a second clock now, and it was running faster. She pushed the door open. The guard turned, and she hit him with the only thing she had. Not the multi-tool, not her fist, but 4 words delivered with the flat authority of someone who has never once in their life needed to shout to be believed. Fire Marshal, step aside. He hesitated. 1 second, that was all she needed. The hesitation cost him the hallway and gave her the door, but she understood with cold clarity that she had just spent the last credible lie she owned. She had no badge, no radio, nothing on her body that looked like authority except the way she carried it, and in a building full of men trained to read exactly that kind of performance, the shelf life of 4 words and a straight spine was approximately 90 seconds. She was already counting. The banquet hall door was 6 feet ahead. Through it she could hear the specific quality of silence that follows a room reorganizing itself around a new threat. Chairs not scraping, voices not rising, the deliberate quiet of 20 men receiving a signal without speaking. Something had changed inside while she was locked away. She did not know what. That uncertainty was more dangerous than anything she could see. She pushed the door open and read the room in one sweep. Choi Min-hoon was still at the table, still seated, but the fresh glass of whiskey that should not have existed was 3 inches from his right hand, and the man she recognized as the poisoner was no longer near the bar. He was seated, integrated, invisible to anyone who had not been watching him 20 minutes ago when he was still wearing the wrong shoes and the wrong patience. Her stomach tightened into something hard and useful. Seo-yeon was visible now, no longer behind the decorative screen, but standing near the private lounge entrance with a man on either side of her, both positioned with the casual deliberateness of people pretending not to be doing exactly what they were doing. She was not restrained. She did not need to be. The positioning said everything, move and someone gets hurt, and the someone will not be you. Choi Min-hoon's eyes found Zuri the moment she stepped through the door. Not with surprise. He had expected her to come back. That realization landed in her chest like something structural giving way. because a man who expected her return had already decided what to do with her, and she had walked through that door anyway with nothing but 90 seconds of borrowed authority and a multi-tool she had not used as a weapon yet. The poisoner's hand moved toward the glass. Zuri moved faster. She just walked back into that room with no badge, no backup, and no plan, only the knowledge that if she stopped moving, someone in that room was going to die. If this story is living in your chest right now, subscribe. Because the people who find this channel and leave are the same people who would have stayed in that hallway. You already proved you're not one of them. She reached the glass before his hand did, and for one suspended second, the entire room held its breath with her. Her forearm came down across the table edge. Not a grab, not a strike, just the clean, controlled weight of a woman who had calculated exactly how much force looks accidental and how much force looks intentional. The glass tipped. The fresh pour hit the tablecloth, and Zuri stepped back with both hands raised, her face arranged into something between apology and confusion, giving every man in that room exactly what they expected to see from someone like her in a room like this. It almost worked. The poisoner was on his feet before the liquid stopped spreading. Not angry, something worse than angry. Precise. He looked at Zuri the way a professional looks at a problem that has now presented itself twice, and the calculation behind his eyes was not whether she was a threat. It was how quickly she could be removed without disrupting the larger operation still running on the other side of the room. Zuri did not look at him. She looked at Choi Min-hoon. He was watching her with the total stillness of a man who had just revised every assumption he walked into this evening with. He did not reach for the spilled glass. He did not signal his guards. He simply looked at her, and the fact that he was doing nothing was the most dangerous thing happening in the room. A man who acts is readable. A man who waits is not. She felt the poisoner moving to her left and made herself stay still, because flinching now would confirm everything, and she had nothing left to confirm it with. Her original plan was gone. Her borrowed authority was gone. What remained was a room that had seen her intervene twice, a boss who was alive because of her and suspicious because of her, and a sister being held 20 feet away as quietly and efficiently as a door being locked. She had stopped the kill. She had not stopped anything else. And somewhere beneath the floor, the gas line that nobody in this room knew about was still leaking. She just saved his life twice with nothing but nerve and a mop cart, and the most dangerous man in the room is still deciding whether to thank her or bury her. If you left this video right now without subscribing, you would spend the rest of the day wondering what happens next. You know you would. Hit subscribe. Because what's coming in this story is the part nobody sees coming, and you did not sit through this just to miss it. The poisoner made his move, and Choi Min-hoon's guard made his at exactly the same moment, which told Zuri something neither of them intended to reveal. They did not coordinate. The guard stepped toward her from the right. The poisoner moved from the left. Two separate reactions, two separate instincts, half a second apart, and in that half second the entire architecture of the night became visible to her in a way it had not been before. These men were not working together. They were working parallel. And neither side knew the other was in this room with the same objective and a completely different method. The guard reached her first. Same iron grip, same backward pull, but this time Choi Min-hoon spoke. One word, Korean, flat. The guard stopped. Zuri felt the grip loosen by exactly 1 degree, not release, just recalibration, and understood that whatever Choi Min-hoon had just said was not her name and was not a mercy. It was a command to wait. She was being preserved for a conversation, not protected from harm, and the distinction was the kind that determined whether she left this building on her own feet. Choi Min-hoon stood and straightened his jacket with the unhurried precision of a man who had decided the immediate crisis was manageable. He looked at the spilled glass. He looked at the poisoner, who had gone very still in the particular way of someone recalculating odds. Then he looked at Zuri, and when he spoke his English was clean and deliberate and stripped of anything that could be called warmth. "You have done this twice," he said, "which means you knew before you touched either glass." It was not a question. Zuri said nothing, which was itself an answer, and she watched him register her silence with something that might have been respect if it had not been surrounded entirely by danger. "Who sent you?" he said. The poisoner shifted his weight. The gas smell from the east wall was faint but present, and Zuri was the only person in the room who knew what it meant. She had 3 seconds to decide what to say. The 3 seconds expired, and Zuri made the only choice that kept her alive past the next 60 seconds. She told him a version of the truth. "Nobody sent me," she said. "I came here to clean floors." The silence that followed was not disbelief. It was the specific quiet of a man weighing something against something else, running probability, deciding which answer served him better, that she was lying or that she was not. Choi Min-hoon had the kind of stillness that made other people fill silence with words they had not planned to say. Zuri had been trained against exactly that technique. She kept her mouth closed and held his eyes, and let the silence sit between them like something neither of them owned. The poisoner moved again, closer this time. Choi Min-hoon did not look at him. He looked at Zuri and said, "You smelled the glass." It was not a question either. He was reconstructing her, piece by piece, working backward from her behavior to her knowledge, and he was doing it faster than she was comfortable with. A man who could reverse engineer a stranger's instincts in real time was not a man whose trust could be manufactured. It could only be earned or avoided, and she was currently too deep in this room to avoid anything. "The condensation pattern was wrong," she said. "The glass had been handled more than once." Something shifted in his face. Not softness, recognition. The kind that comes when a person encounters a mind that operates the way their own does and cannot decide yet whether that is useful or threatening. Behind him, one of the 20 men along the wall moved toward the east side of the room, just repositioning. Routine. But he stopped 2 feet from the baseboard where the gas smell was strongest, and Zuri watched him without moving her eyes from Choi Min-hoon's face and calculated that she now had less time than she had believed. 1 gunshot, 1 spark, 34 floors and no working stairwell. "There is a gas leak in this room," she said, "and every armed man you have is standing next to it." The words landed, and the room changed temperature without changing anything visible. Choi Min-hoon did not react the way a man reacts when he is told something new. He reacted the way a man reacts when something he already half suspected is confirmed by a source he did not expect. A controlled tightening around the eyes, a breath drawn slightly slower than the one before it, the internal revision happening behind a face trained to show nothing. He already knew something was wrong with the floor. He had not known what. "How long?" he said. "Long enough," Zuri said. "Any discharge weapon in this room and the floor goes, both groups." She watched him process both groups and saw the exact moment he understood what she had just confirmed, that she knew there were 2 separate operations running in this room simultaneously, that she had identified them as separate, that she had been watching long enough to map the architecture of an attack that his own security had not fully decoded yet. The guard to her right tightened his grip again, not on instruction, on instinct. The instinct of a man who has just realized the woman he is holding knows more about the danger his employer is in than anyone currently being paid to prevent it. Choi Min-hoon looked at the guard, and the grip released entirely. "Your name," he said to Zuri. She calculated the cost of giving it and the time it took her to breathe. A name was a thread. A thread could be pulled. Everything she had built in this city, the job, the apartment, the quiet ordinary life assembled carefully over 4 years, lived at the end of that thread. But a woman with no name in a room with a gas leak and 20 armed men was not a resource. She was a liability. "Zuri," she said, just the first name. A door opened 1 inch. He nodded once, as though filing it somewhere permanent. Then he turned to his head of security and spoke in rapid Korean, and whatever he said caused 3 of his own men to begin moving the others, all 20 away from the east wall. He had believed her. That terrified her more than anything else that had happened tonight. He just believed her. The most dangerous man in that room, a man who trusts nobody, just took the word of a janitor with no badge and no backup. Comment below and tell me, do you think she made the right call giving him her name? Because that one word just changed everything, and not everybody watching this understands yet exactly how much. The poisoner ran first, and that single decision collapsed every remaining assumption Zuri had about how this night was supposed to end. He did not run toward the exit. He ran toward Seo-yeon. Zuri understood it in the half-second before anyone else in the room processed the movement. The poison had failed twice. The gas threat had just been neutralized by Choi Min-hoon pulling his own men from the wall, and a professional whose primary method has been dismantled twice in one evening does not leave empty-handed. He takes the next available leverage. And the next available leverage was standing 20 feet away between two guards who were now looking at their employer for instruction instead of watching the room. Zuri moved before Choi Min-hoon gave the instruction. She cut across the room at an angle that put her body between the poisoner and Seo-yeon 3 steps before he arrived, and she did it with the specific controlled speed of someone who has calculated the geometry of a room under pressure before and knows that the shortest line between 2 points only works if nobody is already occupying the midpoint. She was the midpoint. She planted herself there and turned to face him with her hands visible and her chin level and every nerve in her body screaming at a frequency she refused to let reach her face. He stopped, looked at her, then looked at Choi Min-hoon behind her. The room had gone absolutely still in the way that precedes something irreversible, and Zuri felt the weight of 20 men, 2 separate agendas, 1 gas-compromised floor, and a sister who did not understand what she had walked into, all pressing against the single fact of her standing body. Choi Min-hoon spoke, 1 word, Korean, different word than before. 2 of his guards moved with immediate and total efficiency, and the poisoner was contained before Zuri had finished her next breath. Not violently, precisely. The distinction mattered in a room where 1 spark ended everything. She exhaled, slowly, invisibly. Seo-yeon's hand found her arm from behind, not grabbing, just touching, the involuntary contact of someone whose body needed to confirm that another person was real and solid and present. Zuri did not move away from it. She did not acknowledge it either. She kept her eyes on the room because the room was not finished with them yet. The silver-haired man 2 seats down from where Choi Min-hoon had been sitting had not moved during any of it. Not when the poisoner ran. Not when Zuri cut across the room. Not when the guards moved. He was watching her with flat, patient eyes, and a stillness that had nothing to do with fear. That stillness was the most dangerous thing left in the room. She just put her body between a professional killer and an innocent woman, with no weapon, no backup, and no guarantee that the man she saved twice was going to save her back. If this story is doing something to you that most videos never do, that feeling is the whole point. Subscribe right now. Comment below and tell me, would you have stepped in front of that man, or would you have let her handle it alone? I genuinely need to know who is watching this. The silver-haired man stood up slowly, and every calculation Zuri had built for the last 40 minutes restructured itself around a new center. He was not part of either group. She was certain of it now. The armed men had not looked to him once during the chaos, and the poisoner had not registered his presence at all during the run across the room. He existed in this space the way a person exists when they have arranged to be overlooked, and a man who could make himself invisible in a room full of killers was not a man who stumbled into dangerous situations by accident. He had been here before any of this started, watching, waiting for a specific outcome. He looked at Zuri with the measured patience of someone who had already decided what she was before she opened her mouth, and when he spoke his English carried no accent and no warmth. "You should not be able to do what you just did," he said. "Not someone in your position." Zuri felt the words land somewhere precise and calculated in her chest. Not a threat yet, a border being drawn. He was telling her that her cover, the uniform, the cart, the $11 an hour invisibility she had spent 4 years constructing, had just been seen through by at least one person in this room who had the stillness and the patience to have been watching her specifically. Choi Min-hoon had gone quiet beside her. That quiet had a texture to it, not deference, but the careful neutrality of a man who recognized that a conversation had begun that he did not yet have enough information to enter. "I cleaned floors," Zuri said. "I saw something wrong." The silver-haired man smiled with only the lower half of his face. You saw two separate operations, a compromised gas line and a contact poison delivery method, in under 20 minutes, while pushing a cart. Nobody in the room responded. The silence confirmed everything he had just laid out. Zuri's next breath took more effort than it should have. She was not blown. She was something more complicated than blown. She was visible to a man whose name she did not know, whose allegiance she could not map, and whose presence in this room meant that everything she thought she had just survived was still, in some way she could not yet define, continuing. "Who are you?" she said. He reached into his jacket pocket and placed a single card face down on the nearest table. He did not answer. Nobody touched the card, and that silence was its own kind of answer. Zuri looked at it without moving toward it, because picking it up meant accepting an invitation she had not yet decided whether she could afford. And in the 4 seconds she spent calculating that decision, the silver-haired man watched her with the patient attention of someone who had done this before and knew exactly how long it took a careful person to arrive at the only available choice. Choi Min-hoon broke first, not toward the card, toward the man. "You were here before the event was scheduled," he said, not a question, a charge. The silver-haired man did not deny it. He looked at Choi Min-hoon with something that was almost respect and said, "I was here before you decided to attend, which means I knew your schedule before your own people confirmed it." The room absorbed that. Zuri absorbed it differently than everyone else, because what it meant was that the silver-haired man had intelligence that predated the insider leak, which meant he was either the source of the leak or he was monitoring the same source from a different direction. Either way, he was closer to the center of this than anyone currently standing in this room had assumed. Choi Min-hoon's jaw tightened by 1 degree. His hands stayed still. The discipline required to keep them still in that moment told Zuri more about what that information cost him than anything his face was willing to show. Seo-yeon made a small sound behind her, not fear, something worse, recognition, like a person hearing a detail that connects to something they were not supposed to know. Zuri turned fractionally, just enough to read the younger woman's face. Seo-yeon was looking at the silver-haired man with an expression that did not belong to a civilian who had wandered into danger by accident. She knew him. And the way she was looking at him, not with surprise, but with the specific dread of a secret arriving ahead of schedule, meant she had been hoping he would not be here tonight. The whole story cracked open in the space between Seo-yeon's face and the silver-haired man's silence, and Zuri felt the fracture run through every assumption she had been operating on since she first pushed her cart through that service entrance. She had been reading this as 2 operations, 2 rival factions, one insider leak feeding both, a night of converging threats that happened to arrive simultaneously. She had been wrong about the shape of it. The silver-haired man picked up the card himself, turned it over, and set it back down facing Zuri. It carried a government seal she recognized from a compliance documentation case she had worked 3 years prior, a financial crimes division that operated below the federal threshold specifically to avoid triggering oversight protocols. Not a law enforcement agency, not a criminal organization, something that lived in the gap between them and used that gap as operating space. The 20 men were never here to kill him, the silver-haired man said. They were here to be seen attempting it. A documented attack on his person triggers a city security review of all his licensed properties. That review, already written, already assigned, would transfer operational control of 3 of those properties to a municipal receivership managed by people who are not in this room. Choi Min-hoon went absolutely still. The poison was real, the silver-haired man continued. That was a separate party, someone inside your organization who understood that a security review would expose them before it exposed you. They needed you dead before the review began. He paused. Both events were scheduled for tonight because the same person fed the timing to both sides. The insider had not chosen a side. The insider had used both sides to guarantee a single outcome, Choi Min-hoon's removal from the board, one way or the other, before morning. Zuri's mind locked onto the next implication before anyone else in the room reached it. If the 20 men were here to be seen, and the documentation was already written and already assigned. Then, someone with institutional authority had been building this for months. Someone with access to city compliance structures. Someone who knew how to make a criminal event look like a bureaucratic outcome. Someone who worked inside the same kind of office she had spent 4 years building her quiet life around. The silver-haired man looked at her, as though he had been waiting for her to arrive at exactly this conclusion. "You filed 3 compliance reports before you came back into this room," he said quietly. "One of them went to the person who built all of this." Her stomach dropped through the floor. She had handed them a weapon and aimed it at herself. Everything she did right tonight just became evidence against her. She saved his life, stopped a poisoning, read a room full of killers, and the one report she filed in good faith just put her name on the wrong desk. If this reframe just hit you somewhere deep, comment below right now. Tell me, did you see this coming, or did this chapter just change everything you thought you understood about this story? Because the people who saw it coming and said nothing are exactly who this story is about. The worst thing about realizing you have made a catastrophic mistake is that the realization does not stop what you set in motion. Zuri stood inside that knowledge for exactly 2 seconds. The report was filed. The wrong desk had it, and there was no mechanism available to her in this room or any other room that could pull it back. The system she had used as a weapon had already absorbed it and was processing it in the direction of the person who built the trap. 2 seconds was all she allowed herself. Then she looked at the silver-haired man and made the decision that cost her everything she had spent 4 years protecting. "I need a name," she said. "The person who received that report." The silver-haired man studied her with the evaluating patience of someone deciding how much a tool is worth before committing to its use. "Why would I give you that?" "Because I am the only person in this room who can walk into that office tomorrow morning without triggering a security response," she said. "You need someone on the inside of the system. I am already there." The silence that followed was the kind that closes doors permanently. She heard it closing. She walked through it anyway. Choi Min-hoon spoke before the silver-haired man could answer. "You would do this." Not a question, not gratitude. The flat assessment of a man recalibrating the value of something he had underestimated. "I would do this," Zuri said, "because the alternative is that whoever built this walks away clean and builds it again for someone else. And the next janitor who sees something wrong in the next room does not have what I have." It was the truest thing she had said all night. It was also the thing that sealed her fate inside this situation more completely than any threat anyone in that room could have made. Because a person who acts from principle rather than fear cannot be bought off the decision later, and everyone in that room understood that, including her. The silver-haired man picked up the card and held it out. She took it. The edge was sharp against her fingers. He gave her the name in a single quiet sentence, and the name arrived in her chest like cold water because she recognized it. Not from the compliance office, not from any files she had worked professionally, but from a conversation 8 months ago in a building lobby. A man who had held a door open for her and smiled with the easy warmth of someone with nothing to hide. She had thanked him. She had thought he was kind. Knowing the name changed her posture before it changed anything else. A weight settling into her spine, straightening it past the point that fear had been quietly bending it all evening. Choi Min-hoon saw the shift. His eyes moved across her face with the quick precision of a man reading a change in weather, and whatever he found there made him take 1 step toward her and stop himself. The stopping was more significant than the step. It meant he had calculated an impulse and overridden it, which meant the impulse was something he was not prepared to act on in front of witnesses. "The report can be intercepted," the silver-haired man said, "if someone with your access credentials initiates a formal amendment within the next 40 minutes. An amendment triggers a hold. A hold buys time." 40 minutes. Zuri ran the math without moving her eyes. Getting out of this building required the elevator, which required the signal jammer being disabled, which required someone with access to the building's security panel on the floor below. None of those steps were her problem alone, but all of them depended on the next 60 seconds going in a direction that was not guaranteed. She looked at Choi Min-hoon. I need the jammer down and I need the elevator clear. He held her eyes for 3 full seconds. In that silence, she felt the specific discomfort of being assessed by someone who had every resource she needed and no established reason to deploy them for her benefit. She had saved his life twice. In his world, that did not automatically translate to debt. It translated to scrutiny. Then he said one word to his head of security. The jammer went down 40 seconds later. She felt it before she confirmed it, her phone pulling signal back like a breath drawn after being held too long. She had 38 minutes. She looked at the card in her hand, at the name she recognized, and made herself move toward the elevator without looking back at any of them. Looking back would have finished her. 38 minutes, one name, 0 backup, and she is walking into the most dangerous thing she has done all night, not a room full of armed men, but a system run by someone who already knows she is coming. If this story has been living in your chest since chapter 1, like this video right now and subscribe before the final chapter drops, because what she loses in the last chapter is something no amount of being right ever gives back, and you already know you cannot stop now. She filed the amendment with 4 minutes to spare, and the system accepted it with the indifferent efficiency of a machine that does not know or care what it just prevented. No confirmation sound, no notification, one status change on a screen pending hold. Review required. And the report that would have handed a criminal the institutional framework he needed to dismantle everything Choi Min-hoon had built was now suspended inside a bureaucratic queue that nobody could touch without generating a paper trail, visible to the federal intake mirror, that the silver-haired man had confirmed was real and watching. Zuri sat with the phone in her hand and felt nothing for approximately 3 seconds. Then she felt everything at once and pressed it back down before it could reach her face. The amendment had required her to log in using her suspended credentials, a technical violation of the administrative hold placed against her that would be visible to every compliance officer in her department by morning. She had broken the terms of her own suspension to stop a conspiracy. The institution would not distinguish between her violation and the deputy directors. It processed infractions with the same flat neutrality it processed everything else. She would not be reinstated. She understood that now with a clarity that sat differently than fear. It sat like a door that had closed behind her while she was still moving forward, and the only honest thing she could do was keep moving. Her phone lit up, unknown number, same cadence as the call the night before. She answered. The silver-haired man's voice was brief and precise. The hold is confirmed. The deputy director's access has been flagged at the federal level. It is done. A pause, one beat. Your credentials will not be restored through normal channels. You know that. I know that, she said. There are other channels, he said, and ended the call. She sat with the silence he left behind and thought about the 14 open case files being reassigned to an understaffed office. The 2 children in transitional housing, whose continuity of care had just been interrupted by a system protecting itself. And the fact that she had won tonight in every way the institution would record and lost in every way it would not. 3 days later, her suspended colleague sent a text, an address, a time. Tonight. She was already reaching for her coat. She won. The conspiracy is stopped. The man is alive. The evidence is preserved. And she lost everything the system was supposed to protect her with. No reinstatement. No acknowledgement. No thank you. Just a text, an address, and a choice that the institution will never see coming. If this story moved something in you that most content never reaches, subscribe right now, because this channel exists for exactly the kind of person who made it to this final line. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And comment one word, just one, that describes what Zuri Hargrove is. Because I already know what word I would use, and I want to know if you see her the way I do.